Today's Locked On Jayhawks, why this is the best opportunity for Kansas to show they're the number one team in the country. We preview Kansas Duke.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson at D Johnson Radio on Twitter, Derek Johnson on Blue Sky. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on YouTube where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of LOJ, we're going to be previewing Kansas and Duke and why this is the best representation to see. Is Kansas really the number one team in the country, like the AP poll indicates, taking on Duke? We'll get into the Duke scouting report, matchups of the game, players to watch, and more on this episode of the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You can get Kansas at a 2.5-point underdog right now, and new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So Kansas takes on Duke. This is not a home game. Bill Self has said that he'd love to do a home-and-home with Duke, but that will not be the case in this one. It'll be played in Las Vegas. So anybody going out to the game, I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun, not just at the game, but outside of the game as well. Now, looking into this one, I think this is the best opportunity for Kansas to really show who they are. Obviously, they have the big win already over North Carolina. They have the nice win that they followed it up with against Michigan State, which, I don't know that Michigan State's going to be a top 20 team or anything, but you'd imagine Tom Izzo team probably be a tournament team, so you get another nice win in that regard. Kansas has logged some solid wins to this point in time. But this is a different level. And I know Duke isn't ranked, like Duke is ranked 11th right now. So the ranking makes this look like, okay, it's on the same par as North Carolina. In fact, I think Carolina, when you played them in the AP poll, was ranked even higher than where Duke is at now. You look at some of the analytics sites, though, and Duke is a pretty consistent top 4, top 5 team in the country. And for my money, you look at some of the betting odds, like at FanDuel, and for my money, I think Duke is on the top tier of national title contenders this season. You look at the pro talent, you look at the defense, you look at the players that they have. I think, to me, this is a real opportunity for, because I think Kansas is going to be a really good team this season. But how good are you? Are you the 6th best team in the country, which is still going to be a good season if that's what you end up being, or are you the very best team in the country? Are you the number one in the AP poll? And this is an opportunity, I think the best one you've had so far, to show just that. This is a battle of the Blue Bloods. This is a battle of what I deem to be national title contenders for this season. It's also, interestingly enough, the first matchup for Bill Self against Duke, and I believe John Scheyer, since he's taken over as head coach. This will be the first matchup for Bill Self against Duke since that 2019-20 season. Obviously, KU played Duke in the Champions Classic a couple of years ago, but that was Norm Roberts filling in for Bill Self as the head coach, and KU obviously ended up winning that game. So this will be his first appearance since then, and that was that ugly Champions Classic game where they had like almost 30 turnovers and lost the game. But ended up being a great team in the end out of that. Let's remember more fondly the matchup with Duke. Before that, I believe, was the 2018 Elite Eight, which that was certainly a fun one for KU. Now, when you look at this matchup, I think one big interesting headline in this is it's kind of a KU college roster versus a Duke NBA roster. Now, Duke's NBA roster, so to speak, filled with NBA guys, is still going to have a lot of success at the collegiate level. KU's collegiate roster, even if it doesn't have as many NBA guys, still going to have a lot of success at the collegiate level. But I do find it interesting because when you look at Kansas, you're like, okay, maybe Flory Badunga eventually turns into a first-round pick. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's down the road. I don't entirely know for sure. Like, maybe you have a guy on the roster like Rakeem Passmore, who a couple years down the road becomes your next, Ochai Agbaji type, who, stays in school for a few years and eventually turns into a first-round pick. Maybe AJ Storr figures it out and puts it all together and ends up being an NBA draft pick. But yeah, you're kind of picking at hairs a little bit more to be like, okay, which guys are going to have a chance to play in the NBA on the KU rosters? Or with Duke, that's not the case. It's like Cooper Flagg's going to probably be the number one pick in the NBA draft. Like Khaman, Maluach is probably going to be like a first-round pick with his size and versatility. Tyrese Proctor, if everything keeps coming together and his shot keeps coming together, like he could obviously be a first-round pick. Like it is loaded with NBA talent. Now that always doesn't win at the collegiate level, but it is interesting the juxtaposition that you have of the two rosters. And then the other one here is health questions for our headlines coming into the game. Sounds like Flory Badunga is going to be good to go. That's going to be important for KU because Duke has all sorts of length and size on the interior, and whether that stresses you from a foul perspective or just needing extra length, blocking shots at the rim, whatever, that's important to have Flory in a game like this. And then is the governor going to be taken off of Shaq Moore, so to speak? Like he has played 2 games since coming back from the injury, but he's been put on more of a minute restriction. In this game, is he going to be allowed to play a little bit more? Is this an opportunity where it makes sense to play him a little bit more? Like, does he have a big defensive impact? And you need that a little bit more in this game. We will see. So Duke comes into this. They are 4-1 on the season. They're ranked, I think, like I said, 11th in the AP poll. They are ranked in the top 5, though, on KenPom. They're actually 4th there. And they're actually, because they are favorites coming into this game, despite being 11th and Kansas being ranked 1st. And one reason why, Kansas is 9th in KenPom, Duke is 4th. So some of the analytic numbers like Duke a little bit better. You look over to Bart Torvik, which Bart Torvik, I know one of the big differences in the formula between KenPom and Bart Torvik is that Bart Torvik has more of a factored in approach about kind of garbage, like taking away garbage time, right? To where with Bart Torvik, you could win the game by 20, but if in the last 2 minutes of the game you get outscored 10-0 because your walk-ons were in, you're not going to get dinged for that as much as with KenPom, which is maybe more body of work. So there, Kansas is ranked 4th and Duke is ranked 2nd. So that would be a top 5 matchup in the country. But both sites have Duke ranked a little bit higher. Now on KenPom, it has Duke as the 15th ranked offense in the country, the number 1 defense in the country. Torvik has them 3rd on both ends of the floor. You look at their schedule so far, they crushed Maine, Army, and Wofford, teams you would expect them to crush, and they did. Their real games were against Kentucky in the Champions Classic and at Arizona. They lost in the Champions Classic Kentucky by 5. It was a game, though, that they controlled, I would say, for a majority of the game. They just didn't shoot well, had a bad 3-point shooting game, and had a bad close of the game, and give credit to Kentucky, like they made some winning plays at the end of the game. And then their last game, which was very interesting, especially when you have the tie-in of Arizona now in the Big 12, they went on the road into Arizona, and they just took the soul out of the arena. They won by 14 points at Arizona. Really impressive win for Duke there. You look at the personnel, their point guard is mainly played by 2 guys. Sion James, he's a Tulane transfer. He can really score it. Caleb Foster, he's over 9 points per game. Last year, he was a 40% 3-point shooter. This year, it's in the low 30s, so we'll see what the real number is there. Foster will also play the 2. Tyrese Proctor is the main 2 guard, though. He's a former 5-star, is back for, year 3 at this point. He's averaging close to 12 points per game, 4 rebounds. He's a good defender, has good length. And he has been really lights out from 3-point range so far this season. 46% from 3 in the early portion of this season. Con Kneppel is a 6'7", guard wing freshman. He is a high volume shooter. He is kind of the, I guess like Cooper Flagg is the biggest overall prospect they brought in. And he's certainly the big thing with Cooper Flagg is his defensive versatility, and he just does everything well. Con Kneppel is probably the best scorer that they brought in, and he's averaging over 14 points per game. He's shooting 40% from 3. He had a rough game against Kentucky in the Champions Classic, but he's been pretty money besides that game. Then at the 4, you have the likely number 1 pick in the draft, Cooper Flagg. I mean, the stats look ridiculous right now. 18 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He's doing a little bit of everything. The 5 is played by a combination of Khaman Maluach. I don't know if it's Maluach or Maluach, but he's over 9 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, 76% from 3. He did make 76% from the floor. He did make a 3 in the Arizona game as well from the corner, and he's been playing 18 minutes a game, big-time rim protector. Malik Brown is 6'9", 220 from Syracuse. He's only averaging 2 points per game, not really much of a scorer, but he's been a solid defender and a really good rebounder so far. So those 2 play. And then another one to keep an eye on the bench, Mason Gillis. He was at Purdue last year. He was just kind of this stretch 4, could come off the bench and be a knockdown 3-point shooter. That's what Duke brought him in to do, and certainly adds another element for the team. And as far as what they do well, I mean, it's pretty much everything when you look at their statistic profiles. They don't turn the ball over. They're good at getting offensive rebounds. They're top 90 in both 2 and 3-point offense so far. they're basically just good at everything on offense. Now they don't rank elite at anything on offense. Like they haven't been like, number 5 or number 10 in the country in this or that, but they don't really have many weaknesses. So they're just like a solid, good offense in really every respect, which makes it hard because you're like trying to take something away. And it's like, what do you take away? Defensively though, it's like they are the elite of the elite. They guard the 3 well. They guard inside the 3-point arc well. The reason why, they have length and versatility, so they can switch with length. So it's going to be tough to get shots off. They get blocks, they get steals, they're elite at defensive rebounding, and they don't really foul. They do a good job of using their verticality. Where they've shown struggles, they haven't really gotten to the free throw line much. They've been a little susceptible to getting the ball stolen. So the overall turnover numbers are good for Duke, but the steal rate, basically, that happens against their offense has been outside the top 200. So, they're not having unforced turnovers. They're not like running into charges much, but every so often you might be able to rip a steal away. KU hasn't done a great job at that besides Dajuan Harris, but maybe that means a big game for Dajuan on that end of the floor. Now, if we use the Kentucky loss as gospel, because that's the one loss they've had in an early portion of the season, what happened for Duke in that game, they did not shoot well from 3. They struggled defending Kentucky from 3. But I mean, like me, this is one of the best teams in the country. So it's less about, what are they doing poorly? It's more about what can you do well in this game? Can you play a really good game to go take the win? So as far as the importance of the game, I think this is the toughest opponent that you're going to be playing in the non-con. There's a chance this is the toughest opponent you play all season long. That's not a guarantee because you do play Houston, you do play Iowa State, you play some of these really good teams, but there is a chance this is the best team you play all season long. And it's a real way to show, I think, with some questions about, well, we think Kansas is good, but are they really the number 1 team in the country? Go win this game, and those questions are going to die out until you suffer your first loss of the season. But beyond that, I think it would give you a pretty bonkers resume early in the season. Like, if you win this game, I think I said this before the season started. If you go undefeated in the non-con, Kansas would only have to go like, well, I guess it's a 20-game conference schedule now, like 12-8 in the conference, and they'll probably still get a 1 seed because of how bonkers the resume would be from just the non-con, including games like this. So opportunity to continue to strengthen that resume here. All right, let's get to our matchups of the game next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by Game Time, which has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Seat views allow you to see a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you even buy. Maybe you're out in Vegas already. Maybe you're like, I'm going to the game, but I didn't buy seats ahead of time. And you're like, I've never been to this arena before. I don't know what these seats are going to look like. Are these good seats? Are these bad seats? Would I rather pay for this section, that section? Pull up Game Time. You can see the seat view. You know what you're getting into. And with the lowest price guarantee, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference, if not. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Thank you to everydayers tuning into each and every show. And you can make your second listen every day. Locked On College Basketball, Locked On College Football. So plenty going on there. Okay, our matchups of the game. Let's get to our first matchup here. Kansas scoring in transition. Duke's defense is long. It is athletic. It's switchable. It's versatile. Like Khaman Maluach is basically a 5-man who can dribble a little bit, shoot threes a little bit. Cooper Flagg basically could guard 1 through 5 on the court. And those are their big men. So like they're going to be switchable. Tyrese Proctor is a very switchable defender. It's a very athletic, versatile, switchable defense. It makes it very difficult if you get into a half-court game. Now, the good news for Kansas here, at least you would hope the good news, is that not a lot of teams have a Hunter Dickinson they can just throw it to in that situation and say, hey, I know you have a 7-2 big man. We have a 7-2 big man as well. Like, we're just going to go one-on-one in the post. And does Maluach bother Dickinson in this matchup and make it harder for him to score? Entirely possible. Does he still score? It's just slightly less efficient. Also entirely possible. But the best way to avoid having to go against an elite defense by some measures, like the best defense in the country, is just don't even worry about getting in half court. Score in transition. The less you need to score in half court against a good set defense, the better off you're going to be. And so far this season, Kansas is averaging 16.8 fast break points per game. That's in the 93rd percentile of the country, according to CBB Analytics. It makes sense, right? Hunter Dickinson's really good at outlet passes. Dajuan Harris is a really good passer in transition. KJ Adams is a really good passer out of transition, leading the break and grabbing and going or kind of coming out of the middle. You've got some players who are good transition scorers, like an AJ Storr. You've got players who can hit transition threes, like Zeke Mayo and Ryland Griffin. There are a lot of reasons why this team is good at transition, and the numbers back that up. But so far, Duke has only given up 6.6 fast break points per game. That puts their fast break defense in the 83rd percentile nationally. Something's got to give here. They've been good at preventing it. KU's been good at getting it. The more you can get it in this game, the better off you're going to be. Number 2, Kansas avoiding turnovers. Duke is in the 81st percentile nationally, getting 17.2 turnovers per game. And with all that length and athleticism and switchability, they do a good job getting steals. They're in the 84th percentile in steal rate, frustrating offenses. And then once they get it out in transition, the athleticism certainly shows off. So for Kansas, you have to be strong. You have to be smart with the ball. Otherwise, Duke's going to be firing in all cylinders. And what we said earlier, like Duke is a good offense. They're not an elite, they're not elite of the elite on offense like they are on defense, at least yet, right? Maybe later in the season it'll happen for them. When everything comes together and is clicking. But again, very good offense, but the defense is like elite. And if you can put them into more half-court settings and you're not giving up steals where they're scoring in transition, that's an advantage for you. Number 3, Kansas finishing at the rim. This is the ultimate strength-on-strength matchup. Teams are only shooting 53% at the rim against Duke. That puts them in the 90th percentile nationally. Makes sense with the personnel. They've got a 7'2 center. They've got a 6'9 Cooper Flagg, who is an unbelievable shot blocker and could be playing the 5 if they didn't have all this other height, like Malik Brown and yada, yada, yada. Kansas, though, has shot 72% at the rim this season. I mean, that's a 20 percentage point difference from what the two are basically putting up. That's 89th percentile nationally. Also makes sense, right? You have Hunter Dickinson down low. KJ's been a good finisher inside. Do the two numbers average out, right? Does this just end up being Kansas shoots 62%, 63% at the rim? Or does one side win out definitively over the other? Because if Kansas ends up shooting to Duke's average of 53% at the rim, I don't think they can win this game with how much they rely on being able to do that. But if Kansas shoots 73% at the rim, something that Duke typically is able to stop, I don't think Duke's going to be able to win this game. So you look at that, and is it going to be something where it ends up being in between, or is one team going to show their strength is better than the other team's strength? Our player matchup here is KJ Adams against Cooper Flagg. As great as Flagg has been, and I mentioned some of the numbers earlier, they're unbelievable. What if I go off percentile numbers, like per 40 numbers in the percentile, he's in the 87th percentile or better in points, assists, defensive rebounds, steals, and blocks, and per 40 minutes. That's a bit redundant how I said that, but nonetheless, he's basically just doing everything. The one thing, though, that hasn't totally come around for Cooper Flagg is the efficiency in shooting the ball. He's shooting 53% on twos, which is below average, especially for a big man. And he's only shooting 26% on threes this far, which is also below average. Now, is that just he's had some slow shooting nights and reversion to the mean? Is that all of a sudden he's going to start hitting shots at a high level and maybe this is one of those games? Absolutely possible, right? But it's also possible that the offense is behind the defense right now. And so for KJ Adams, if that's going to be the matchup, which I'd imagine it will be, can you keep him being at least like a relatively non-efficient scorer, right? If Cooper Flagg has 18 points, but he goes, 6 of 16 to get there, that's not the worst thing in the world. And then on the other end, what can KJ give you on offense in this one against what is viewed as a generational defensive prospect? And furthermore, you look at the Michigan State matchup where they had two bigs. Like Duke kind of has two bigs in a way, but they're just more versatile than Michigan State. And that was not a great matchup for KJ because the lane was clogged. You had all these big men. That might be the case a little bit in this one. Maybe not, because their guys are a little bit more, versatile, and maybe you can get them out on the wing or something. But KJ needs to have at least a decent offensive game here to be able to make this work. Otherwise, you end up with a situation where Cooper Flagg is just not really defending KJ Adams and just floating. And if Cooper Flagg is a roamer that is just going around swatting blocks as a help defender because he doesn't have to worry about KJ Adams, that's a big problem for KU on the offensive end of the ball. So I think Kansas really needs KJ on both ends of the floor in this one. And as I kind of mentioned earlier this week, it's a big opportunity for him to be like, look, this is how valuable I am to this team. I played really well in this matchup. But on the flip side, if he's struggling and those things are happening, like I said, and the lane's clogged and it's allowing Cooper Flagg to be this help side defender that's wrecking everything on offense, do we see more of Ryland Griffin, AJ Storr at the 4, where you try to take advantage of it offensively, maybe a little bit more similar to that 2018 matchup with KU and Duke in the Elite Eight. Let's continue on here. Who are our players to watch besides our player matchup? This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can get Kansas plus 2.5, or you can get them on the money line if you want to get some plus odds for the game between Kansas and Duke happening in Las Vegas. You can get Kansas at plus 114. The over-under is also 148.5. But you can also get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, college basketball, college football, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. So as of now, there are no player props that are out for the KU Duke game over on FanDuel. Again, Kansas plus 2.5, 114 money line. Over under is 148.5. And as far as some of those props, I don't know, maybe this will steer you in the right direction. What about players to watch for KU? Hawks to soar. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to go with Dajuan Harris. I look at the Duke defense, and it is an elite defense overall. I don't know that Duke's point guards on defense are bad defenders, but when you're comparing them to Cooper Flagg and Maluach and Tyrese Proctor, I think point guard is maybe a little bit more of a weak spot than those other positions defensively. And this is a game where I think you could need a little bit more scoring from Dajuan Harris. Like, I could see him hitting a couple key threes in this game, getting left open as the kind of extra guy. And it's going to come down to if he makes them or not. And you also, going back to the idea, you need to hold on to the basketball, can't avoid those turnovers. Veteran point guard kind of leading the way. This is a big game for Dajuan Harris. So I'm going to go with him for Hawks to soar on the offensive end. On the defensive end, I'm going to actually go with Hunter Dickinson, which isn't always the case. We know sometimes in ball screens or defending in space, that cannot be great. And I think Kansas is going to probably live with Khaman. Like, he hit that corner 3 against Arizona, but he's 1 for 2 on the season through 5 games. So I think you go into this one, if you're Kansas, and play the risk game and say, you know what, if he wants to take 2 threes, we just got to live with the results. And we got to hope he goes 0 for 2 or at worst 1 for 2, and in very worst case scenario, if he goes 2 for 2, it's just 2 threes we can make up for it. The worst case is what happened last year with like Iowa State. I forget the name of that kid who had like 4 made threes coming in, or 7 made threes coming into the matchup. And then he went like 5 for 5 from 3 or whatever. But also with Hunter Dickinson, Maluach, if he's not going to take a bunch of threes, he's a big guy inside. And then Malik Brown isn't much of a scorer. And then if the matchup calls for Cooper Flagg to play the 5, I think that's a bad matchup, a very bad matchup for Hunter Dickinson. But as long as that's not happening, I think it's an okay matchup with the opposing center, where the only time he's going to be put out in space is in ball screens. Now that becomes the big question. Can he defend enough in ball screens? And is there just going to be like alley-oops for days to Malik Brown and Khaman Maluach? But I do think this will be a matchup where he could wind up with a ton of defensive rebounds, which is part of defense. It's finishing out, the possession. I don't think this is the worst matchup for him on paper, because Duke does play some size down low. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We will be back late on your Tuesday night into your Wednesday morning to recap with a postcast episode of whatever happens in the Kansas Duke game. Might come a little later than normal on your Tuesday night, but it'll be there eventually. So make sure you're tuned in for that. Subscribe right here with Locked On Jayhawks, and we'll see you then.